You get butter in your hair. So speaking of butter, butter is one of our most favorite things to eat in the world. So this is some of our homemade sourdough bread loaded with butter. How is that, Luce? So my favorite butter is actually a cultured butter. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to make some homemade cultured butter. If you've never had it before, it's a much different experience. There's so much more flavor that goes into the butter, but it's a really cool, almost little science experiment you can do at home. So we are going to use some of this, which is cultured buttermilk. So there's live active cultures in there, and cream. Ready, Lucy? Now that you took another bite, will you add 2 tablespoons of buttermilk here? And I'm gonna add a whole quart of heavy cream. Go ahead with your other one. So this cream is 40% fat, and that's, in the long run, that's what we're gonna be looking for, is the fat from this to make our butter. We're gonna go ahead and stir it around a little bit. But so this video is gonna take us a few days to do. I actually wanna show you how this cream will get thicker as it sits here. So I'm gonna cover it really loosely. We'll come back in about 12 hours and I'll show you how much thicker it's gotten. All right, so it's been a little more than 12 hours. At 12 hours, I was definitely asleep. So we're at the next day here, but you can see that we're starting to get a little bit thicker, but it still is very fluid. Around the edges, you can see it's thickened up a little bit. We'll come back and check it again tomorrow. All right, it's only been about 8 hours since our last check-in. Lucy's behind me making some scrambled eggs for breakfast, but I want to show you how much this got thick just in those last 8 hours. You can see that I can spoon it. It's like the consistency of whipped cream now, and it's a little bit more sour. Go ahead and taste a little of it. Yeah, just a little bit sour. You're starting to get a little bit of that sour cream flavor, which is not quite where we want it yet. We're gonna let it go for another couple days, but we're well on our way. All right, so now it's been 4 days since we added our buttermilk to our heavy cream. Check it out. So first of all, I can do that. So now this has gone from a liquid to a solid. It is very thick. This is exactly what we want. It tastes great. It's got a little bit of a tang to it. So this, at this point, is more or less sour cream. It's creme fraiche. So it's fresh made sour cream. It's really, really good. Lucy and I had it on some tacos the other day, and I had it on something this morning. But it's quite good, just like this. But the next step is I'm gonna use my mixer here to do the work for me. So I'm gonna scrape everything into the mixer. You can see it come out as one solid piece. I wanna make sure we don't lose any, because this butter is gonna be awesome. Then I'm gonna put in my whip. All right, so now we go ahead and just turn on our mixer. So now that it's been going for a couple minutes, I'm gonna go and scrape down the sides. And this is when you want to start to be careful, because once you start to separate the actual butter from the buttermilk, it's gonna splash all over the place. So just keep an eye on it, but I'm gonna go back on high speed. Now it's starting to spit at me a little bit, so I want to scrape it down one more time. But now there's actually little pieces of butter in there that are separating from the rest of it. It still kind of has a whipped cream type consistency, but you can see that it's starting to get a little chunky. So I'm not going to go quite as high speed now, but I'm going to turn it back on and let it go. Now you can see it really starting to get very chunky. This is when it's really going to separate that buttermilk from the actual butter. So we'll turn it on again and let it complete its process. And just like that, you can see it starting to splash around. we just made butter. So I'm going to pull this out. And you can see that we've got all sorts of butter in here, and then that is the actual buttermilk in there. So I'm going to clean the rest of this stuff up, and we'll get on to the next step so that we can clean this butter a little bit, and then we'll salt it. All right, so I cleaned out our whip. Now I've got my butter and buttermilk here. I'm going to pour mostly the buttermilk into this strainer that I have lined with the cloth. If I had cheesecloth, I would totally use cheesecloth. And then I'm going to put all the solid butter in there. And I'm just going to give this a few minutes for the buttermilk to drain out before we come back to it. So a lot of our buttermilk has drained out, so now I'm going to kind of force the issue. I'm going to grab the corners of my towel, hold it up, and start to squeeze the towel a bit. Our goal in our next couple steps here is to try to get rid of as much buttermilk as we can. The buttermilk will go bad a lot faster than the actual butter fat, so we're going to try to get rid of as much buttermilk as we can. So you'll see now I've got this hunk of butter. There's still, believe it or not, a lot of buttermilk in there. But what we're going to do next is I'm going to clean up this bowl. I'm going to pour my buttermilk into another container to save it. I'll just label it and pop it in the refrigerator, but then we're going to come back and we're going to rinse this butter. So before we get to rinsing our butter, I just wanted to show you. So remember we started with a quart of cream, and then this is how much buttermilk we have, and this is how much butter. This volume will decrease a little bit as we rinse out some more of the buttermilk, but you have two really good products here. This is perfect for making a whole nother batch of cultured butter. Even if you didn't culture your cream before, you would still end up with buttermilk. It wouldn't be cultured, but you would still have buttermilk, and it's really good to use in bread recipes. It's good to use in biscuits. It's great to use on fried chicken. The cultured one certainly has a little more zing and more flavor to it, but the other buttermilk is really quite good. So the next step here is I have a bowl of ice water, and I'm going to take the butter and I'm going to drop it into the ice water. And what we're going to do here is I'm going to use the back of this wooden spoon, and I'm going to start kind of mashing this a little bit. And what you're going to see is that the water's going to get cloudy. See how it's already getting cloudy? And what's happening here is we are actually forcing more buttermilk out of the butter. So I'll keep moving it around and keep kind of smashing it. And once it gets pretty cloudy, I'm going to stop and I'm going to drain my water out, and we're going to keep rinsing it until the water stays clean. So after you've used the spoon a couple times, the ice in the water is going to make the butter start to get more firm. Then it actually gets to a point where it's easier to use your hands. And you'll just kind of knead the butter. I like to use a fist and just kind of squeeze it and fold it back over on itself. It's almost like you're working with dough, but we really want to get rid of any buttermilk that's in there. It'll get replaced with a little bit of water, but that's okay because the water doesn't go bad. It's the buttermilk that does. So this is getting pretty clean, so I might only do one more rinse, but you can see still have a little bit of cloudiness in the water. I'm going to go drain this out one more time, and I'll knead it one more time, and then we'll get ready to add our salt. All right, so our water's coming out pretty clear. So now what I want to do is actually grab the butter, and I'm going to start to knead it in my hands, and I'm going to let this excess water come out. So I'm just kind of forcing it around to try to squeeze out any more water. At this point, what we're doing is trying to raise the level of fat in the butter. But also, to me, I really like salted butter, but I like using really big salt crystals. So what I want to do is try to remove enough water from this that the salt crystals that I put in there do not dissolve. Now, I'm going to transfer it to another bowl, and I'm going to go ahead and put in my salt. So like I said, I like a really coarse salt. This is a very, very coarse salt. So this, my favorite thing about this butter is that to taste just the butter, it tastes like unsalted butter. But once you get in there, you get this change of texture and this blast of salt when you bite into an actual piece of salt. That's one of the reasons it's key to get rid of as much water as you can, because if there's too much water, it'll actually dissolve the salt. Which isn't bad, it'll still taste like salted butter, but you don't have that experience of the unsalted butter with the crunch of the salt. So our salt is pretty well incorporated in there. I did taste it, I decided I want a little more. I'm gonna try a little on some of our homemade sourdough here. It's very good. You get a little bit of the funk from the sour cream that we put in there, and then the crunch of that butter. That is really quite good. So what I'm going to do here is I have a piece of parchment paper. I'm going to scoop out my butter. Put it right here in the middle of the paper. And I'm just going to use the paper to form this into a log. And then just twist up the ends. And so there we've got about a pound of really, really exquisite butter. You can break this into smaller pieces. This makes an outstanding Christmas gift. I've done it for Christmas gifts for people before. Use it for about anything. I probably wouldn't use this to bake with though. Butter that we buy from the store, and if you use a similar butter all the time, it always has a very specific amount of water and amount of fat. This isn't going to be exact, and you're going to lose some of the great flavor that you have when you add a bunch of other ingredients to it. But this will last in the refrigerator for a few weeks. If you don't think you're going to eat it, which you're totally going to eat it once you taste it, stick it in the freezer. It'll last for a few months. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you make your own. Hey guys, will you tell us today's question?
Sure. What is a prime and what does it do?